There comes a moment in every emotionally manipulative relationship that changes everything. It is not always loud, it is not always dramatic. Sometimes nothing on the outside appears different at all. The conversations continue, the routines remain the same, the messages still arrive, the smiles may even continue, but something fundamental has shifted. That shift happens when you stop seeing isolated incidents and begin recognizing a pattern. Instead of asking yourself, "Did that really happen?" you begin asking, "Why does this keep happening?" That single change in perspective is powerful because manipulation survives on confusion. The moment confusion starts to disappear, the illusion begins to crumble. A person who depends on manipulation invests enormous effort into creating a carefully managed image. They want to be seen as reasonable, generous, misunderstood, or even heroic. Behind that image, however, they often rely on subtle tactics that keep others doubting themselves. They may twist conversations until you feel responsible for problems you did not create. They may deny things they clearly said. They may rewrite history so convincingly that you begin questioning your own memory. They may shower you with affection after hurting you, making you wonder if perhaps you imagined the pain. None of these actions are random. They serve one purpose: to keep you focused on defending yourself instead of examining their behavior. For a long time, this strategy may work because most people naturally want to believe the best about those they care for. Healthy people assume honesty because they themselves value honesty. They expect mutual respect because they offer respect. That hopeful mindset becomes the very thing manipulation exploits. You continue searching for logical explanations while overlooking the uncomfortable reality that the confusion itself is part of the strategy. Every time you excuse another contradiction or dismiss another warning sign, the cycle gains more strength. Then something changes. It might be one conversation that feels strangely familiar. It might be reading about emotional manipulation and realizing every description sounds painfully familiar. It might be hearing another person's experience and recognizing your own story in their words. Suddenly, events that once seemed disconnected begin fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. What once appeared to be isolated misunderstandings now reveal a consistent pattern. The repeated criticism, the shifting standards, the unpredictable affection, the subtle intimidation, and the constant rewriting of reality all begin pointing in the same direction. The fog starts to lift. This moment is deeply unsettling because it forces you to confront two difficult truths at once. First, you recognize that what you experienced was not your imagination. Second, you realize how much energy you spent trying to solve a problem that was never yours to fix. That realization can bring grief, disappointment, and even anger. Yet hidden inside that discomfort is something far more valuable than certainty. It is clarity. Clarity allows you to stop chasing explanations that never made sense because they were never meant to. When the manipulative person begins to realize that you see through the performance, something changes for them as well. They notice your questions are different. They notice you no longer apologize automatically. They notice you pause before accepting blame. They notice you are observing instead of reacting. Your silence becomes more unsettling to them than your arguments ever were because silence often signals awareness. It tells them that their usual tactics are no longer producing the same results. The image they worked so hard to maintain begins developing cracks. Every contradiction becomes more visible. Every exaggerated story sounds less convincing. Every attempt to distort reality meets someone who now remembers the facts instead of surrendering to pressure. This is why awareness is so significant. The real power does not come from confronting every lie. It comes from no longer depending on the lie to make sense of your world. Many people imagine that discovering the truth instantly solves everything, but awareness is only the beginning of a different journey. It does not erase emotional attachment overnight. It does not immediately silence years of self-doubt. There may still be moments when old habits tempt you to question yourself again. There may still be days when you wonder whether you are being too sensitive or too harsh. That does not mean you are moving backward. It simply means your mind is adjusting to a reality that was hidden beneath years of manipulation. As your confidence slowly returns, you begin trusting your observations again. You no longer dismiss the uneasy feeling in your heart simply because someone insists you are overreacting. You recognize that healthy relationships do not require you to constantly abandon your own perception of reality. Respectful people may disagree with you, but they do not systematically convince you that your experiences never happened. They do not demand that you ignore your intuition in order to preserve their comfort. One of the greatest transformations during this stage is learning to separate facts from emotional pressure. Manipulation often creates urgency. It pushes you to respond immediately, apologize quickly, or make decisions before you have time to think. Awareness interrupts that cycle. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin observing carefully. You ask yourself whether the words match the actions. You notice recurring patterns instead of isolated promises. You evaluate consistency rather than dramatic displays of emotion. This slower, more thoughtful approach weakens the influence of manipulation because it gives truth room to breathe. Ironically, the more you see clearly, the less interested you become in proving anything. Early on, you may feel a strong desire to expose every contradiction and explain every inconsistency. Over time, however, you discover that genuine clarity does not require constant debate. You understand that people committed to manipulation rarely surrender simply because they are presented with evidence. Instead, your energy shifts toward protecting your peace rather than winning arguments. That shift is one of the clearest signs of emotional growth. The mask does not crack because you force it off. It cracks because you stop holding it in place. You are no longer participating in the illusion by questioning your own reality every time someone challenges it. You are no longer carrying the burden of preserving an image that never reflected the truth. The strength of manipulation was never found in flawless deception. It was found in your willingness to doubt yourself. Once that willingness begins to disappear, the foundation of control weakens. The performance becomes harder to maintain, the contradictions become easier to recognize, and the truth quietly takes the place where confusion once lived. From that point forward, your greatest protection is not anger, revenge, or confrontation. It is the quiet confidence that comes from finally trusting what you can clearly see. Many people assume that once someone realizes their manipulative behavior has been exposed, they will become more honest, more cooperative, or more willing to repair the relationship. Unfortunately, that is often not what happens. When a person has relied on control rather than genuine connection, losing that control can feel threatening. Instead of stepping back to reflect on their actions, they may respond by increasing the very behaviors that created the problem in the first place. This is why so many people are shocked when the relationship becomes more confusing after they begin seeing the truth. They expected honesty to bring resolution, but awareness often exposes just how deeply manipulation has been woven into the relationship. Control depends on predictability. As long as you react the way the manipulative person expects, they feel secure. If criticism causes you to apologize, they continue criticizing. If silent treatment makes you chase after them, they continue withdrawing. If guilt convinces you to sacrifice your own needs, they continue using guilt. Over time, these reactions become patterns that they rely on without even thinking about them. Your responses become as predictable as pressing a button and receiving the same result every time. The moment you begin responding differently, the entire dynamic changes. Perhaps you stop defending yourself against false accusations. Maybe you refuse to argue over events you know happened. Perhaps you calmly say no to unreasonable demands instead of immediately giving in. These may seem like small changes, but they interrupt a pattern that has existed for months or even years. To someone who depends on control, that interruption feels significant because the strategies that once guaranteed results are no longer working. This is often the point where manipulation becomes more intense rather than less. You may notice stronger emotional reactions, harsher criticism, or unexpected displays of affection that seem completely out of character. None of these responses necessarily reflect genuine change. More often, they represent different attempts to regain influence over someone who is no longer responding in familiar ways. One common tactic is guilt. Suddenly, everything becomes your responsibility. You are told that you have changed, become cold, or stopped caring. They may remind you of everything they have supposedly done for you while ignoring the ways they have repeatedly hurt you. Their goal is not simply to express disappointment, but to make you feel morally obligated to return to your previous role. If guilt has worked before, they assume it will work again. They count on your compassion becoming stronger than your discernment. Another tactic is blame shifting. Instead of acknowledging harmful behavior, the focus immediately turns toward your reactions. If you calmly describe something that hurt you, they insist your tone is the real problem. If you point out dishonesty, they accuse you of being distrustful. If you establish a healthy boundary, they claim you are selfish or unforgiving. The original issue quietly disappears while you find yourself defending your character instead. This shift keeps accountability out of reach because every conversation becomes about your perceived flaws instead of their actions. Sometimes manipulation appears in the form of sudden kindness. After periods of conflict, they may become unusually affectionate, generous, or attentive. They say exactly what you have longed to hear. They make promises that sound sincere. They behave in ways that resemble the person you always hoped they could become. These moments can feel deeply confusing because they awaken hope. You begin wondering whether things are finally changing. Yet if those moments consistently disappear once stability returns, they reveal a troubling pattern. Genuine transformation is measured through consistent behavior over time, not temporary gestures that appear whenever control is slipping away. Silence can also become a weapon. Instead of discussing problems openly, they withdraw emotionally. They ignore messages, avoid conversations, or act as though you no longer exist. This silence is not peaceful reflection. It is often designed to create anxiety and uncertainty. The hope is that discomfort will become so overwhelming that you will abandon your concerns simply to restore communication. When someone learns that silence causes you to chase them, they may repeat it whenever they want to regain the upper hand. Some manipulative individuals go even further by attempting to rewrite the story completely. They present themselves as the injured party while portraying you as unreasonable, unstable, or ungrateful. Friends, relatives, or coworkers may hear a version of events that bears little resemblance to reality. This can feel incredibly painful because your private experiences are being replaced with a public narrative designed to protect their image. The temptation is to defend yourself against every false accusation, yet constantly chasing every distorted story often leaves you emotionally exhausted while the manipulative cycle continues uninterrupted. As these tactics intensify, you may begin questioning whether your decision to recognize the truth was a mistake. The relationship suddenly feels more difficult than ever before. Conflict increases. Emotional pressure grows stronger. Old doubts return. This is precisely why awareness must be accompanied by patience. Increased resistance does not necessarily mean you are making the wrong decision. Sometimes it simply means familiar methods of control are no longer producing familiar results. One important lesson during this stage is learning the difference between emotional intensity and genuine sincerity. Manipulation often thrives on dramatic expressions of emotion. Tears, anger, promises, accusations, and passionate speeches can all create the impression that something meaningful is happening. Yet true change is rarely measured by emotional displays alone. It is measured by humility, accountability, consistency, and respect over time. Someone who genuinely desires healthier relationships accepts responsibility without constantly redirecting blame. They respect boundaries instead of punishing them. They demonstrate change repeatedly rather than expecting instant trust because of a single emotional conversation. Remaining calm during this period is often one of the greatest challenges. Manipulative behavior is designed to provoke reactions. If they can draw you back into endless arguments, desperate explanations, or emotional outbursts, the familiar cycle resumes. This does not mean you become emotionless or suppress your feelings. It means you refuse to let your emotions dictate every response. You create space between what you feel and how you choose to act. That pause becomes one of your greatest strengths because thoughtful responses are much harder to manipulate than impulsive reactions. As your awareness continues to grow, you also begin noticing patterns that once escaped your attention. You realize that apologies without changed behavior accomplish very little. You recognize that promises lose credibility when they are repeatedly broken. You understand that genuine love never requires you to surrender your dignity in exchange for temporary peace. Instead of evaluating isolated moments, you begin evaluating consistent patterns over time. That shift transforms your perspective because patterns reveal character far more clearly than occasional emotional displays ever can. The increased manipulation you experience after recognizing the truth is not evidence that you are powerless. It often reveals that the old methods of control are losing their effectiveness. The louder the pressure becomes, the more important it is to remain anchored in what you know to be true. Clear thinking, steady boundaries, and confidence in your own perception gradually replace the confusion that once dominated your decisions. What once felt overwhelming begins to lose its influence because you no longer mistake emotional pressure for truth, and you no longer allow temporary tactics to define your understanding of reality. There is a remarkable shift that takes place when awareness replaces confusion. For a long time, you may have believed that your greatest weakness was not knowing how to make the relationship better. You searched for the right words, the right reactions, the right amount of patience, hoping that if you could simply understand the situation more clearly, everything would finally improve. But the deeper truth is that your greatest strength is not found in changing another person's behavior. It is found in seeing reality for what it is and trusting yourself enough to respond wisely. The moment your awareness becomes stronger than your fear, everything begins to change. Manipulation survives in the shadows of uncertainty. It grows wherever people are taught to doubt their own thoughts, ignore their instincts, or constantly seek approval before believing what they have experienced. If someone can convince you that your memory is unreliable, your emotions are irrational, or your observations are always incorrect, they no longer have to control every situation directly. You begin controlling yourself on their behalf. You question your own judgment before they even have the chance to question it. You silence your concerns before they need to dismiss them. This invisible form of control is one of the most damaging because it slowly disconnects you from your own inner confidence. Many people who have lived through prolonged emotional manipulation become trapped in a cycle of self-questioning. They replay conversations repeatedly, searching for mistakes they may have made. They wonder if they misunderstood what was said. They apologize for things they never intended. They carry responsibility for problems they did not create because accepting blame feels easier than facing constant conflict. Over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. The mind is never at rest because it is always trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces keep changing. Awareness interrupts that cycle. It does not happen because you suddenly become suspicious of everyone. It happens because you begin paying attention to patterns instead of isolated incidents. You stop evaluating each conversation as though it exists by itself. Instead, you notice recurring behaviors that consistently leave you feeling confused, guilty, or emotionally drained. You recognize that healthy disagreements usually lead to understanding, while manipulation often leads to deeper confusion. That realization changes the questions you ask yourself. Instead of wondering, "What is wrong with me?" you begin asking, "Why does the same unhealthy pattern keep repeating?" That simple change in perspective is the beginning of emotional freedom. One of the greatest gifts of awareness is that it restores your trust in your own perception. For a long time, you may have ignored the quiet voice inside that told you something was wrong. You dismissed uncomfortable feelings because someone insisted you were overreacting. You overlooked obvious contradictions because you wanted to believe the best. You accepted explanations that never truly made sense because confronting reality felt too painful. Awareness allows that quiet inner voice to become stronger again. It reminds you that wisdom often begins with paying attention to what you have been trying to ignore. This does not mean every feeling is automatically accurate. Emotions can be influenced by fear, stress, or past experiences. However, awareness encourages you to examine your emotions rather than dismiss them. If you consistently feel anxious after certain conversations, there may be a reason worth exploring. If you repeatedly leave interactions feeling guilty without understanding why, that pattern deserves attention. Instead of judging yourself for having emotional reactions, you become curious about what those reactions may be revealing. Curiosity replaces self-condemnation, and clarity begins replacing confusion. As awareness grows, you also become less dependent on external validation. In the past, you may have needed someone else to confirm that your experiences were real before you trusted them yourself. You searched for reassurance from friends, family, or even the very person who was causing the confusion. You hoped they would eventually admit what happened and validate your perspective. But awareness teaches an important lesson. Your reality does not become true only when another person agrees with it. Truth remains true whether it is acknowledged or denied. Learning to trust that principle strengthens your confidence in ways that constant approval never could. Another powerful transformation is learning the difference between words and patterns. Manipulative individuals often know exactly what to say. They may sound sincere, compassionate, and convincing. They promise change with remarkable confidence. They explain away contradictions with impressive detail. If you focus only on individual conversations, it becomes easy to believe those explanations. Awareness teaches you to widen your perspective. Instead of asking whether today's words sound convincing, you ask whether those words consistently match yesterday's actions and tomorrow's choices. Consistency becomes more important than charisma, and long-term behavior becomes more meaningful than emotional promises. Your awareness also changes how you respond to pressure. In the past, urgency may have caused immediate reactions. Accusations demanded instant defense. Guilt demanded immediate apology. Anger demanded quick compromise. Manipulation thrives when there is no space between stimulus and response. Awareness creates that space. You pause before answering. You think before defending yourself. You evaluate instead of reacting. That pause may last only a few seconds, but it changes everything because thoughtful decisions are far less vulnerable to emotional pressure than impulsive ones. As your confidence grows, something else begins to happen. You stop feeling responsible for managing another person's emotions. This does not mean you become unkind or indifferent. It simply means you recognize the difference between compassion and unhealthy responsibility. You can care about someone without accepting blame for every disappointment they experience. You can listen without surrendering your own truth. You can remain respectful without abandoning your boundaries. This balance becomes possible because awareness reminds you that healthy relationships are built on mutual responsibility, not one-sided emotional sacrifice. You may also notice that your tolerance for confusion begins to decrease. Situations that once seemed normal now feel unsettling because you recognize behaviors you previously overlooked. Repeated dishonesty no longer appears harmless. Constant criticism no longer feels like constructive advice. Emotional manipulation no longer resembles genuine concern. This heightened awareness is not making you overly sensitive. It is helping you recognize unhealthy patterns before they become deeply rooted again. Wisdom often looks like increased discernment rather than increased suspicion. There will still be moments when doubt returns. Old habits do not disappear overnight. Years of conditioning cannot be erased by a single realization. There may be days when you question your progress or wonder whether you are being unfair. During those moments, awareness encourages you to return to observable facts rather than emotional pressure. Look at consistent behavior. Look at recurring patterns. Look at whether respect, honesty, and accountability are truly present. Facts provide stability when emotions become unsettled. Perhaps the greatest strength that awareness provides is the freedom to make choices based on truth instead of fear. Fear asks, what if I lose this relationship? Awareness asks, what is this relationship costing me? Fear focuses on preserving familiarity, while awareness focuses on protecting integrity. Fear clings to hope without evidence, while awareness seeks evidence before placing hope. That shift does not make your heart harder, it makes your judgment wiser. Your awareness becomes your greatest strength because it reconnects you with something manipulation tried to take away, your ability to trust your own discernment. It teaches you that clarity is more valuable than constant reassurance, that consistent actions reveal more than persuasive words, and that peace grows when you stop surrendering your judgment to someone else's version of reality. As your confidence continues to deepen, confusion loses its grip, fear loses its authority, and your decisions become guided not by pressure or guilt, but by wisdom that has been patiently rebuilt through truth. One of the greatest misconceptions people have after recognizing emotional manipulation is believing that victory comes from exposing every lie, winning every argument, or finally making the other person admit what they have done. It is understandable why this hope exists. After spending so much time being misunderstood, dismissed, or blamed, the desire to be heard feels completely natural. You imagine that if you could only present enough evidence, explain yourself clearly enough, or point out every contradiction, the truth would finally be accepted. But over time, you begin to realize that the deepest form of freedom is not found in changing another person's mind. It is found in reclaiming your own peace of mind. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. Some people think it means becoming cold, uncaring, or emotionally distant from everyone. Others believe it requires suppressing feelings or pretending that painful experiences never happened. True emotional detachment is none of those things. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to experience emotions without allowing them to control your decisions. It is learning to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. It is protecting your inner stability even when someone else is trying to create chaos around you. Manipulative relationships often train people to live in a constant state of emotional reaction. Every unexpected criticism demands an explanation. Every accusation feels like a threat to your character. Every period of silence creates anxiety. Every moment of kindness brings hope that things are finally changing. Your emotional state begins rising and falling according to someone else's behavior. Without realizing it, your peace becomes dependent on their mood, their approval, and their willingness to treat you well. That is an exhausting way to live because your emotional world is no longer anchored within you. It is controlled by circumstances you cannot predict or manage. The first step toward emotional detachment begins when you recognize this pattern. You notice how quickly your emotions shift based on someone else's actions. A single message can determine whether your entire day feels peaceful or stressful. A single conversation can leave you replaying every word for hours. A single accusation can convince you to defend yourself repeatedly, even when you have done nothing wrong. Awareness allows you to pause and ask an important question. Why does one person's behavior have so much authority over my emotional state? That question is not about assigning blame. It is about rediscovering personal responsibility in the healthiest sense. You cannot control another person's choices, but you can gradually learn to control your own responses. This realization is empowering because it shifts your focus away from changing someone else and back towards strengthening yourself. Instead of asking how to stop another person's manipulation, you begin asking how to stop allowing manipulation to dictate your peace. One of the most noticeable changes during this process is learning to resist the urge to explain yourself constantly. People who have experienced emotional manipulation often feel compelled to justify every decision, defend every boundary, and answer every accusation. They hope that one more explanation will finally clear up the misunderstanding. Yet manipulative conversations rarely revolve around genuine understanding. They often revolve around maintaining control. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, the goalposts continue moving. New accusations replace old ones. Fresh misunderstandings appear just as previous ones are resolved. Emotional detachment allows you to recognize when further explanation serves no meaningful purpose. This does not mean refusing to communicate honestly. Healthy communication remains important in every respectful relationship. The difference lies in recognizing when communication has become a tool for endless conflict rather than mutual understanding. Sometimes the strongest response is a calm, simple statement followed by quiet confidence instead of endless debate. Not every accusation deserves an elaborate defense. Not every criticism requires your emotional investment. Wisdom includes knowing which conversations deserve your energy and which ones simply drain it. Another important part of emotional detachment is accepting that you cannot control how others choose to see you. Manipulative individuals may misunderstand you intentionally or unintentionally. They may question your motives, distort your words, or create stories that paint you in an unfavorable light. Your natural instinct may be to correct every misunderstanding and protect your reputation at all costs. While honesty always matters, emotional detachment reminds you that your worth is not determined by someone else's opinion. If your entire identity depends on being correctly understood by every person, you will remain emotionally vulnerable to anyone willing to misrepresent you. Healthy boundaries become much easier when emotional detachment begins to grow. Boundaries are often difficult because they trigger uncomfortable emotions. You may fear rejection, criticism, or conflict. Manipulative people frequently exploit these fears by suggesting that your boundaries are selfish, unnecessary, or hurtful. Emotional detachment helps you distinguish between temporary discomfort and genuine wrongdoing. Feeling guilty does not automatically mean you have done something wrong. Sometimes guilt simply reflects the discomfort of breaking an unhealthy pattern. The more you understand this difference, the more confidently you protect your emotional well-being. Another transformation occurs in how you interpret emotional intensity. Manipulation often relies on creating urgency. Every disagreement feels like an emergency. Every conflict demands immediate resolution. Every emotional outburst pressures you into making quick decisions. Emotional detachment allows you to slow the pace. Instead of responding immediately, you give yourself permission to think. You allow emotions to settle before making important choices. This pause is not avoidance. It is wisdom. Clear decisions are rarely made in the middle of emotional storms. As your emotional independence strengthens, you also begin noticing that your happiness no longer depends on unpredictable moments of approval. In unhealthy relationships, affection may arrive inconsistently. One day you feel deeply valued, and the next day you feel invisible. This unpredictability creates emotional dependence because you begin chasing those rare moments of acceptance. Emotional detachment breaks that cycle by teaching you to build your confidence from stable sources instead of fluctuating approval. Your sense of worth gradually becomes rooted in your values, your character, and your understanding of truth rather than someone else's changing opinions. You also become more comfortable with silence. In the past, silence may have felt threatening because it often signaled punishment or rejection. You rushed to repair every strained conversation because conflict felt unbearable. Emotional detachment changes your relationship with silence. Instead of fearing it, you learn to use it wisely. Silence becomes a space for reflection rather than panic. It allows emotions to settle, perspective to return, and wisdom to guide your next step instead of fear. Perhaps one of the most liberating changes is recognizing that peace does not require perfect circumstances. You may never receive the apology you deserve. You may never hear someone admit the full truth. You may never convince everyone to understand your experience. If your peace depends on those outcomes, it will always remain outside your control. Emotional detachment gently shifts your focus towards something far more dependable. It reminds you that peace begins when your emotional stability is no longer held hostage by another person's choices. This journey does not happen overnight. There will be moments when old habits return, when painful words still affect you more deeply than you expected, or when the desire to defend yourself becomes overwhelming. Progress is rarely measured by never feeling emotional again. It is measured by how quickly you return to clarity after those emotions arise. Each time you choose thoughtful restraint over impulsive reaction, each time you honor your boundaries despite temporary discomfort, and each time you protect your peace instead of chasing another unwinnable argument, you strengthen a new way of living. Gradually, your emotional world becomes steadier, your confidence becomes quieter, and your heart is no longer controlled by someone else's attempts to create confusion, because the greatest victory is not proving your strength to another person. It is living with a peace that no one else has the power to take away.